Wasabi guys, coming back at y'all with another Commander deck tech video. This time we're going to be looking at Prossh, Sky Raider of Care. We're doing something a little bit different, going to try to make a budget version for this deck. And for those of you who are unaware, I did run a poll on my Patreon. This is how I'm going to be deciding deck techs from now on. And as you can see here, there was an option for Teysa Orzhov Scion and an option for Inala Archmage Ritualist. If you want to play your part in deciding what videos I make, Patreon is a good way to do it, and you'll be supporting the channel at the same time. So for this deck, if you don't know, Prossh Sky Raider of Care is a 6 mana Jund commander 5/5 flyer, legendary dragon. Whenever you cast him, you get X01 red kobold creature tokens named Kobolds of Care Keep. Thankfully, we actually have the tokens now from Masters 25, so another reason to make this video. He has an activated ability where you can sacrifice another creature. Doesn't have to be the kobolds, but you do get them. And Prossh gets +1/+0 until end of turn, so basically fire breathing, but instead of paying 1 red mana, you're sacrificing a creature, which is really cool. There's a ton of ways that you can synergize with Prossh. You can deal with sacrifice triggers, you can deal with death triggers, you could also deal with ETBs, you can deal with a lot of cool stuff with Prossh. Now, as far as budget decks go for Commander, I usually consider decks that are under $200 to be budget. This one, I believe, is around $90, so to some people it's still going to be too expensive, but to me, $90 is pretty cheap, and you still get a lot of good cards in here. As always, we're going to look at our lands first, and I usually just go over some good utility ones, and we do play Care Keep, the one that came with the original deck, which was Power Hungry back in 2013. This one just has an activated ability where you can pay 2 mana and tap it to just put a 0/1 red kobold creature token onto the battlefield, so if you're desperate, you have another way to get a token. We also have Rogue's Passage because we can make Prossh pretty big, and since this is budget, we're going to try to make him big as possible, and then just make him unblockable so that we can then deal commander damage, which isn't always the easiest thing to do when your commander doesn't have trample or other ways to make him unblockable. Flying is still good, don't get me wrong, but we could always make him more deadly when it comes to combat. Moving on to our artifacts, we have Skull Clamp because our commander makes us 0/1 tokens. One of the best decks to literally play Skull Clamp. You're just paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards every single time. We do play the obvious Soul Ring, as well as Felwar Stone and the 3 signets within these colors. We do have plenty of ramps, so we don't need to have all these artifacts, but if we are playing on a budget, we don't always have the best lands, so to make up for that, it doesn't really hurt to have some of these. And we of course have Lightning Greaves because sometimes we want to swing with our Prossh. Making Prossh hasty, giving it Shroud is perfect. And pretty much the same exact thing also applies to Swiftfoot Boots. We have an Ashnod's Altar. In a more optimized version, I would probably be playing a Phyrexian Altar as well, but that card is close to $30. It hasn't been reprinted yet. This one will suffice, it's under $5. Gonna give you 2 colorless mana every time you sacrifice a creature. We have a ton of them. And then we end our artifacts with Commander Sphere. Pretty basic, gonna tap for 1 of our 3 colors, and it can sacrifice itself when we're desperate to draw a card. Moving on to creatures, really what we want to focus on is taking advantage of Prossh, whether it's ETBs or sacrificing. Playing a Blood Artist is perfect. It's exactly what we want. It's a staple in really any deck that's playing a sizable amount of creatures, and in this deck, especially considering we have tokens, that's even better, and a commander that's a free sack outlet. Sakura Tribe Elder, again, we want to have some sort of ramp. We don't have the best lands. We don't have shock lands, fetch lands, anything that's going to make it to where we get mana that we want, because those are also really expensive and they add up. Sakura Tribe Elder is like under $1. We also play Zulaport Cutthroat pretty much for the same exact reason as Blood Artist. It's a little bit better or worse, it's open to interpretation. Blood Artist works on your opponent's creatures when they die. Zulaport is just your creatures, so in Prossh, if you have 6 tokens the first time you cast him, you have 6 creatures that you can sacrifice, and you're going to be gaining 6 life. Each opponent's going to lose 6 life. Pretty good card either way. Catacomb Sifter. I really like this card. I don't think it's in my optimized version of the deck, but it's still pretty decent. You get a trigger whenever another creature you control dies. You get to scry 1, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token that can sacrifice itself to give you 1 colorless mana. Not the best creature, but the trigger is definitely worthwhile, especially when you're playing on a budget. We do need some win cons, and Champion of Lamholt I think is a decent one, especially when you're playing on a budget under $2. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lamholt's power can't block creatures you control, so everything, Prossh, all your tokens, everything that's pumped up. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, which is awesome because we're going to be getting 7 ETBs off of our first casting, you're going to be getting 7+1/+1 counters on Champion of Lamholt because Prossh is an ETB machine. Goblin Sharpshooter, another one that's really cool, also pretty cheap. Doesn't untap during your untap step, which doesn't really matter because whenever another creature dies, you get to untap it, which is even better because you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So each time you're going to be sacrificing a token or another creature, you're going to keep untapping it, and eventually if you have any way to get Prossh out there in an optimized version, you're going to use something like Food Chain, which is like a $30 card. You're going to get a ton of Cobalt tokens. You're going to get a lot of ways to sacrifice creatures, making something like this pretty much an instant win con. But even in the budget version, I still like it. We have Reclamation Sage. We don't have the most expensive removal to choose from, so we might as well get what we can get with a pretty decent creature. Sprouting Thrynax, another pretty cool budget option. Gonna die and give us 3 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. So you get more creatures. You get 4 creatures in total for just 3 mana. Pretty decent value. Stronghold Assassin, actually much cheaper than Attrition. You would probably want an Attrition in an optimized version, but that card is also, I believe, close to $10 or above it. This one is obviously cheaper because it's on a creature tap activated ability, so you are pretty limited in how often you can use it, but it's still good removal. What else is going to get you a forest? Pretty simple. Anger is also awesome because we have a pretty easy way to just sacrifice it with our commander. We're likely going to control a mountain, so all of our creatures are going to get haste. And then we have Falconwrath Noble for the same exact reason as Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat. Going to drain a lot of life and give us a lot of life. Ogre Battle Driver is fantastic with Prossh. Getting a lot of creatures entering the battlefield, going to give them +2/+0 in haste. I've won a lot of games just because a lot of people underestimate this card's power and impact. Then we have Pitiless Plunderer, one of my favorite cards from the newest set, Rivals of Ixalan. Whenever another creature you control dies, so it can be tokens as well, you get a colorless treasure artifact token that can sacrifice for 1 of any mana. So there's a lot of cool combos associated with Pitiless Plunderer already, and in budget it's just as powerful, I would say, as a Blood Artist or a Falconwrath Noble. That type of impact whenever another creature dies is so good. We have Shattergang Brothers. This is also one that came in the original Power Hungry deck. Still a good budget option if you don't have better removal or better ways to keep the pressure on your opponents. You can basically have a Dictate of Erebos, Grave Pact effect for creatures on the first activated ability, and you can pretty much do the same thing for artifacts and enchantments. So a lot of utility there. Smothering Abomination is going to force us to sacrifice a creature during our upkeep, but that's all fine because whenever we sacrifice a creature, we get to draw a card. So another cool sacrifice trigger. Going to give us a ton of card draw, and you would probably be surprised how much. And then we have Acidic Slime for the same reason that we have Reclamation Sage. It's good to have removal on creature ETBs if we don't have the most expensive removal as far as instants and sorceries go. With Endrixar, Master Breeder, going to give us a ton of tokens whenever we cast a creature spell. Prossh is always going to be CMC 6, even though the total amount of mana we cast him is going to be different because of the commander tax, but this is just going to give us more thralls, more tokens that we can abuse. I think that's pretty cool. Then we have Mazarek Crowd Death Priest. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this one specifically works with sack triggers, whereas some things work with death triggers. So we do have a commander who's basically a free sack outlet that we can sack those Cobalt tokens. Each time we want to do that, we're going to be putting a +1/+1 counter on each of our creatures. So the tokens, the other ones, Prossh, Mazarek, all going to get +1/+1 counters. So that's really cool. Also an extremely underrated card. Mycoloth, perfect. You're going to devour a ton of Cobalt tokens, and each upkeep you're going to create that many, as far as the counters go, you're going to create that many Saproling creature tokens for each one on Mycoloth. Then we have Deathbringer Thoktar, probably one of my favorite creatures in this entire deck. Whenever another creature dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar, and then you get to remove a +1/+1 counter from it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So you're basically just saving up a bunch of +1/+1 counters. Pretty much the same exact purpose though as Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat. You want to threaten based off of your numbers, what you're able to sacrifice. You want to threaten that much damage, that much life loss. Just a brilliant creature. We have Dragon Lair Spider, another cool creature that can give us a ton of tokens. This is whenever an opponent casts a spell, you get a 1/1 green insect creature token, so that can get out of hand pretty quickly. We have Atarka World Render. You kind of got to go with some budget options, and these legendary dragons from Fate Reforged are actually pretty budget. Flying and Trample, whenever a dragon you control attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn. Our Prossh has a fire breathing type effect where we can just keep feeding kobolds to it, make him gigantic, and then give him double strike with Atarka. That's that's likely going to be enough to deal commander damage to someone. Then we have Butcher of Malik here. I wanted to keep everything in here under $5, so this is where we're going to get a lot of those Grave Pact triggers off of. So each time another creature we control dies, each opponent's going to sacrifice a creature. Easy way to get rid of their board. Sacrifice removal is amazing. Then we have Chancellor of the Forge, one of the most underrated red creatures in the game. It has the turn 0 where we get a hasty goblin, but that doesn't really matter because when it enters the battlefield, we're going to be getting X/1/1 red goblin creature tokens with haste equal to the number of creatures we control, and that's including itself. So if we have Prossh out there and let's say 6 other kobolds, we play Chancellor of the Forge, it enters the battlefield, 8 total creatures, we're getting 8 of those hasty 1/1 tokens. That's crazy. Then we have Stalking Vengeance, because whenever another creature we control dies, it's going to deal damage equal to its power to target player. And we have a lot of ways to kill off creatures. Unfortunately, our kobolds have initial power of 0, so we have to find a way to pump them up, but there are definitely ways to do that. Moving on to our enchantments, we have 8 of them. Cryptolith Rite is going to make all of our creatures Birds of Paradise, which is fantastic. Just a 2-mana enchantment in green, going to help us ramp up. Evolutionary Leap, another cool sack outlet. Sometimes we just want to get to our next creature. This is a pretty decent way of doing that. Goblin Bombardment is amazing, just like Deathbringer Thoktar, just like Blood Artist, everything else. Saving up on all of these creature tokens and just doing this at the right time, you can really knock someone out. You could definitely just threaten lethal off of this alone. It's amazing. Impact Tremors, because Perforos is a bit expensive, also hasn't been reprinted. A lot of good cards haven't been reprinted that are awesome in the stack, but Impact Tremors is thankfully under $1. It's a common. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it's going to deal 1 damage to each opponent. So again, our Prossh is going to get us a lot of ETBs. In addition to everything else, you're going to be burning them out. We do have Beastmaster Ascension, so it is a way to get our kobolds +5/+5 so we can swing with them and get enough quest counters and then likely kill off a player. So this is a pretty decent budget way of winning with this deck. We have Fecundity. This card is amazing. Originally came in the Power Hungry deck, the same exact one that Prossh came in. Whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller gets to draw a card. It is for anybody, but hopefully we're the deck that has the most creatures dying, and we probably will be. So Fecundity is likely going to benefit us the most. We have Death Reap Ritual, has a cool morbid trigger at the beginning of each end step, so your opponents as well. If a creature died this turn, you get to draw a card. So this isn't just yours, but your opponents. If we want to, in turn order, we can just start sacrificing our kobolds just to draw a card at the beginning of the end step. I think that is definitely a good deal. Also a pretty cheap option. We play Vicious Shadows because if we need another win con that's kind of out there, this is one that you should probably consider for any budget option in red. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, you get to have Vicious Shadows deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. That is just incredibly powerful. You're going to be able to sacrifice your kobolds and then just over and over and over again hit them for so much damage. That is just amazing. Then moving on to our sorceries, we have 12 of them. We have Hull Breach, which is an amazing budget option that I don't think anyone plays as much as I do. It can destroy either an artifact or an enchantment, or it can destroy both. So you have the ability for just 2 mana to get rid of 2 different permanent types. I think that's amazing. We of course have Cultivate and Kodamas Reach. They do the same exact thing. They're good if you're playing on a budget. They're good if you're not playing on a budget. They're just amazing cards either way. They're going to get you a land from your deck onto the battlefield tapped and 1 to your hand. Going to ramp you up and get you some decent mana fixing. If you're missing any colors, hopefully it's not green, you should be able to get what you need. Eldritch Evolution is amazing. With Prossh, we can easily just sacrifice it and get something bigger, maybe an Atarka, maybe a Chancellor of the Forge, whatever else we need. Stalking Vengeance. It's a little bit better in a more optimized version because you can just search up for Craterhoof Behemoth, but that card is a little bit too expensive for a budget build. But really, it's not a bad card either way. You could sacrifice cheaper creatures to get other big creatures. The fact that you're only paying 3 mana to cheat into play something from your deck, I think is amazing. And it's still a pretty cheap card. It's under $2. Why not? Then we have Read the Bones. Don't have the best card draw in a budget build, so we might as well settle for a 3 mana sorcery that's going to scry 2 and then let us draw 2 cards. Can't really go wrong. Then we have Chain Reaction. This card is awesome budget removal. 4 mana, you're going to deal X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. And then we have Decimate. We have the ability to get rid of 4 different permanent types. So artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands for 4 mana. Yeah, it has the downside that you do need to have targets, but it's still a brilliant card. Then we have Diabolic Tutor, because Demonic Tutor is like $20 at the very cheapest. So 4 mana to do the exact same thing is not a bad thing at all. Then we have Explosive Vegetation, more land ramp, gonna get us 2 basic lands from our library onto the battlefield tapped. And then we play Overwhelming Stampede, one of the overrun effects that we do need in the deck. It is still extremely cheap, under $1. Gonna give all of our creatures until end of turn trample and +X, where that X is equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. So our Prossh is going to be at least 5 power. That should be a lot of power and toughness for our tokens. Pretty cool. Then we have Rishkar's Expertise, more card draw, really cool underrated budget card. You draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, so Prossh is 5. Again, you can easily draw 5 cards for 6 mana. That's still a good deal. But you also get to cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So you get a free casting and you get a ton of card draw. Brilliant card, I love it. And to wrap up our sorceries, we do have a Blasphemous Act. Really cheap, really efficient, board wipe. Amazing cost reduction, 13 damage to each creature. I absolutely love this card. And then we wrap up the deck tech with 6 instants. We have Artifact Mutation, gonna destroy an artifact and give you 1/1 Saprolinks equal to its converted mana cost. A little bit narrow as far as removal goes, it only hits 1 artifact, but the fact that you get tokens makes it even better. Then we have Terminate, destroys target creature, can't be regenerated, pretty basic. Croson Grip, pretty much essential for every green deck I play, and it's still extremely cheap. Split Second, destroying an artifact or an enchantment is brilliant, and it stops and shuts down a lot of combos. We also play Putrefy to get rid of an artifact or a creature, and that creature can't be regenerated. We have Fresh Meat, because we have a lot of ways to kill off all of our creatures, all of our tokens. We create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each creature put into our graveyard from the battlefield this turn. Technically, tokens hit the graveyard before they just dissipate, so I think that's pretty sweet that we can get a ton of 3/3s. They're bigger than 0/1 Kobold, so that's pretty decent. And we play Second Harvest because we don't have access to cards like Parallel Lives on a pretty strict budget. For each token we control, we put a token on the battlefield that's a copy of that permanent. And it's just a 4 mana instant, so we can do this at our opponent's end step. We have the advantage of timing. So anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this deck tech. I liked doing something like this. It was definitely a little bit different from what I'm used to doing with deck tech requests. I still let my patrons decide what I end up doing, so they're still involved in the decision making process, which I think is pretty fair. But as always, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave any suggestions. If you have a way to make this deck even cheaper, please let me know. I think I tried my best to make it under $100. But as always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.